Hi, I'm Rida, and an interesting fact about myself is that I love traveling and really every aspect of it, from exploring a place's history to doing all of the adventurous things to the fun things as well. And I want to try and explore as many countries as I can before I can't anymore.
What are like a few of the countries you've been to over the last 12 months?
So far, I've been to Spain, I've been to Portugal, and parts of Italy. But I want to try and do some more trips before this year ends, and definitely a solo trip in the works too.
Any idea where the solo trip will be?
Well, Italy has always kind of been my dream destination because it's got everything. It's got history, it's got culture, it's got mountains. So definitely want to try and explore that country bit by bit.
Hmm. Yeah, Italy is definitely on the bucket list. I feel like I could spend 2, 3 weeks there. Hope the solo trip
Yeah,
turns out like
yeah,
very well.
definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
so for listeners, that's Rida Samreen. She's an alumni of the London School of Economics, so LSE in the UK, where she did a Bachelor of Science in Economics. Today we'll be chatting more about the choices she made, the lessons she's learned along the way, along the college journey and beyond, as well as I'm sure there'll be like tons of nuggets of insight and wisdom and advice for high schoolers listening to the podcast as they sort of embark on this exciting journey of university. It's sort of this big word that the podcast aims to deconstruct bit by bit, episode by episode. So welcome to UNI Unveiled. I'm your host Arya the Road, currently studying at Minerva University. Welcome, Rita. Super glad to have you on the podcast. Sorry, I'm eating into your Sunday.
Oh, no, that's completely fine. It's just morning time, so you haven't impinged on anything. I was probably going to be sleeping if I wasn't doing this. So,
Awesome, awesome. I think what I'd have to start with is, and I do this with all alumni, is bringing listeners up to speed. You've graduated more than a year ago. What are you currently working on?
yeah, so I'm currently in risk consulting, which basically is a sector that helps clients of various industries, any industry you can think of, deal with their current risks as well as any risks on the horizon. And that's quite topical right now with all of the geopolitical problems different companies are facing, the macroeconomic problems because we're almost or maybe are going into a recession. So it's a very up and coming industry and it is very topical.
Mm, yeah, sounds very exciting. The sense I'm getting is that it's very math heavy. So I'm guessing the math heavy LSE curriculum also is helping you in terms of the work you're doing, analyzing risk. Would you say that's pretty fair to say?
Definitely, yeah. I will say the analytics part of economics plays into it a lot, but at the same time, you have to learn how to deal with clients, how to present to them in a good way, how to retain clients as well. That's a big thing. So, kind of the sales part, the analytics part really just all comes into it together.
In terms of like basic skill sets, maybe you could actually like list out a few of the basic skills that are sort of very crucial to your job. And my question is if you feel that like LSE, both academically and non-academically, do you feel it prepared you well in terms of these skill sets that you're currently using on your job?
Mhm. So I think the analytical and the logical skills is something that LSE prepared me really well for. There's also obviously communication, a bit of sales, a bit of, having the power to convince people is are more softer skills that I gained through either the extracurriculars I did, the societies I was part of, or my own podcast as well. So I think on the whole, it has helped me, but there's obviously things that you only learn once you start doing the job and start practicing those over and over again.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. What are a few of those skills where you learned only on the job? Like you sort of weren't prepared or trained enough on the job through experience, through interactions, you learned these skills.
That's a good question. I think one really important thing is how to speak to different people. And that is something you really, really understand once you start working because you could be presenting to the CFO of a company versus the risk manager of a company, and they would both have different interests and different kind of interest basically in the subject matter that's being discussed. And so you have to know how to appeal to each of them separately. And then also just, speaking to people of different age groups, different cultures, and being inclusive towards all of them is something that I have learned a lot more of as I do my job.
Assuming like I gave you a magic wand, I took you back in time, you're in LSE, second year, third year, anything you would have like, anything you wish you would have done differently in terms of which would have helped you hone the skills, you were better prepared and you didn't sort of have to learn this skill on the spot, on the job?
I think LSE did prepare me for it as much as it could, but there's always, when you're in an institution, there always tends to be kind of a distance between you and, say, a professor. So as much as you would love to turn up at their office and speak to them all day, you can't because they have a lot of other things to do. But when you're in the workspace, you actually get the freedom to really talk to whoever you want, which I think is a lot more kind of paramount in helping you gain those skills.
I'll go like maybe a few minutes back to sort of just something you think that is the podcast you were a part of during your time at LSE. For me, the podcast is sort of also part of a longer vision in terms of I see myself also in the content creation, the content marketing space long term. You're currently doing economics work, and so I'm curious for you specifically, despite knowing that you're not sort of going into the content creation space or the podcasting space specifically long term, what was the motivation for actually joining the podcast at LSE?
So this is something that when I was in my first year, the person in their third year who were leading the podcast then, I was speaking to them and I asked them what their motivation was behind starting the podcast because they were the ones who started the whole idea. And they said to me that they've always had these questions about different things in their fields, and really it's almost a selfish way for them to satisfy their own curiosity, which I thought was a really nice way to look at it, because whoever I picked to interview or whoever my team picked to interview were people that we were genuinely interested in speaking to and learning a lot about. And it was a way for us to just, ask everything we wanted to of them and have them answer for us. So that became my motivation to also do it myself and lead it myself in my third year. And I haven't ruled out not becoming a content creator, because I do remember after I graduated from LSE, I did really miss being able to do that. So it was always on my mind of maybe doing my own podcast at some point. But that's in the brainstorming stage right now.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I did not know that. I'll also put the name of the podcast in the description. But for someone who's listening, who's interested, let's say like 2 or 3 lines about what is the podcast about.
So the podcast is called Beverage Report, and it was basically for us to call up academics from around the world in the field of economics, from someone in behavioral economics to someone in macroeconomics to some people looking at the economics of very interesting things, looking at the economics of newspapers, at the economics of contracts, just really interesting things. And so it was for us to kind of just ask them questions about some of the papers they did, pick their brains on what motivated them to do or explore each of those subjects. And we've had some amazing people on it. We have Sir Oliver Hart, who won a Nobel Prize in 2016, as well as someone who, when we interviewed, didn't have one, but she won the Nobel Prize the next year, which was an amazing feeling. So some really amazing guests and some really good information on what they did and what they've explored.
Interesting. It's actually so interesting. Yesterday, a cousin was asking me, he wants to start a podcast of his own, completely different topic. He was asking me about sort of what has been the learning experience or the learning curve. And I was looking back, it's been like just 2 months since doing the first episode. This is in the 30s, but it's been an insane learning curve. And at this point, I think I'm a pretty clear advocate for like, if anyone is very intellectually curious and they want an excuse to be able to meet interesting people and talk to them and pick their brains, I feel like a podcast is a great way to go. Like, I feel like even if someone doesn't want to do this long term, they want to do something totally different, they don't want to become a podcaster, starting a podcast, doing like even 30, 40, 50 episodes, you will learn to be like so much better in terms of curiosity, conversation skills. As I'm sure you experienced, you'll be allowed to dive deep into and pick the brains, like have an excuse to actually pick the brains of like Nobel Prize
Yeah,
laureates in whatever field you're interested in. So I think great avenue for like learning and for growth, intellectual curiosity.
definitely. Yeah. Yeah, even if you're not leading it, if you can be part of a team that does it, it's such a great learning opportunity.
Hmm. We'll come to actually extra. I mean, this is for later section of the episode, but we'll definitely be saying more about like extracurriculars in college, the value of those, like the value of spending time outside the classroom. Also, as you said, societies and extracurriculars and different activities. That we'll come to. What I want to do now is take you back in time and actually go back to like high school, Rida. There were a
Yeah.
bunch of key decisions you made studying in the UK, economics, LSE. I would love to go through those one by one because I think it genuinely was amazing to me how, as 11th graders, as 12th graders, a lot of people I meet just aren't very clear in terms of this is the country, this is the course, this is the institution. And that's perfectly okay. Like, I think up to 12th grade, I had a lot of questions in my mind. So, I think whatever you say here would be helpful in terms of anyone who's currently in the decision making process, just getting a sneak peek into how you thought through the whole process. So let's start with the most macro level, the biggest decision, which was actually going to the UK. And so, as you told me before recording, you applied to a bunch of different countries, US, UK, Hong Kong, Singapore. What eventually took you to the UK specifically?
Yeah. So interestingly, I was one of those people who kind of had no clue where I was going to apply, had no clue what college I wanted to go to, what country I wanted to go to. And I've seen people in years younger than me be so much more prepared for the whole process, and that's amazing for them. But even if you're not, just know that it's going to be okay. You'll be fine at the end of it. So, like I said, because I didn't have a set approach, I kind of applied everywhere. I applied to UK, Canada, Hong Kong, Singapore, Italy, and the US, of course. And I think a few steps into my college application process, I realized that maybe the US wasn't the right decision for me at this point because it was going to be too expensive for me to afford, and I didn't want my family to have to take that burden on themselves. So that is when I decided against applying to the US, and I know that can be a big factor for several people. So it's completely fine. That's when I decided to look at the other options that I'd applied to. Funnily enough, UK was never actually on my list of places I wanted to apply to. It was a very, very big afterthought, and I only applied there because my college counselor insisted that I do. I kind of, this is going to sound so crazy, but I had watched Sherlock as a kid, and in that, because of the filter they used, the place always seemed so grey, and that was kind of the image I had of the UK in my mind. That was always grey and rainy, which was very immature without proper research. Do your research. But I think once I actually came to the UK, and I applied to LSE because I'd heard a lot about it, but I never actually expected myself to go there. But once I actually came to the UK, I realized it was more of a retrospective realization of why the UK is a great place to study in and to live in. And I'm sure that if I knew what I do now before I was applying, UK would never be an afterthought. It would be an immediate decision to apply to.
Why do you say that? Like the last sentence, if I could ask you to expand that, like if you had known what you know now, the UK would have been the first decision, not an afterthought. Why exactly? Like,
Yeah.
can you go deeper?
Several reasons. Firstly, it's a lot more affordable than the US. It's also, I think, if you're an international student, if you don't actually have, say, US citizenship or UK citizenship, the UK accepts internationals a lot more better than the US does in terms of just the work visa that they offer. It's a lot more easier to get sponsorships from companies. and it's also an easier route to citizenship. So in a way, you actually feel like the country wants you there. Whereas in the US, I have heard from friends that it is very hard when you transition from university to job to actually get your visa in time and get it all sorted before it's too late. So those are two big reasons, but there's also so many other reasons. The fact that the UK is a 3-year course versus a 4-year course, which in some way also reduces the financial burden on your parents. And I think from the beginning of my education in the UK, I realized how big of a focus there is on preparing you for life after university. Just from the first year, people start applying for these things called spring weeks, which are insight weeks that you can have with different companies. And it's just 1 week where you're just spending time learning about that company, maybe working on a few small projects. And that happens in first year in around April time. And that can lead to then an internship in your second year with that company, which can then lead to a job after you graduate. So it's a very nice route, but even if you're not on that route, there's so many opportunities and there's so many ways in which they prepare you for that life. So that's also something that I really appreciated about the country and just the general attitudes of people here. And it was, to be honest, when I joined, it was not something that I knew of. I had never heard of a spring week in my life. And that's why I didn't do one in my first year, because I had no idea I needed to apply for that or when I needed to apply for that. But it's okay if you don't. You don't have to kind of join that route. You can also just apply for an internship or also just apply for a job and you'll be completely fine. But there's things like these that people who have been living in the UK are aware of and they're able to exploit or just take advantage of really well. And so that's definitely something that anyone who's coming to the UK should be prepared for, especially if they're doing economics or something related to that.
And that's exactly why I get like current students and recent alumni on the podcast, which is so many times a student has said, in my third or fourth year, I realized that this amazing resource exists in my university, or this amazing thing exists. I wish I had known about that in the first year. So for high schoolers listening, maybe just introduce them to the concept of Spring Week and maybe they can like start taking advantage of that in the first year itself. Simple clarifying question, is this just applicable to LSE or is this broadly across most UK schools?
Are mainly for kind of degrees that are in the finance sphere, if that makes sense. So economics, PPE, finance, management. I'm not sure if they're there for engineering. They probably are, but for those kind of subjects, I'm not too sure. But I know that for these, it's kind of a countrywide thing where you will have spring weeks. It might just be located in the UK or in London or surrounding cities, but it's definitely a very common thing.
Okay, let's go one level more micro and walk us through exactly what happens during that spring week.
Yeah, sure. So I wouldn't know too well because I haven't done one myself, but from what I have heard from people and what I understand, it's basically you spend a week in spring with the company. It used to be in person, but then when COVID came, it became online for a while. And now I think it's sort of a hybrid of the two. But you spend a week with a company and you're supposed to apply for the spring week as well. So you undergo a small kind of application process where you apply, you have a few interviews, you might have a few tests as well. And if you get that, you can do a week with the company where they'll basically introduce you to different aspects of the company and they might get you involved in some work and you might even have a presentation to do at the end of your spring week. And it's a really good opportunity for you to learn about that industry more if this is something you want to enter in the future or what you want to pursue. It's a very kind of risk-free way of experimenting without maybe ending up in that company and then realizing you don't like it. And it's also a good opportunity for you to then, if you do like it, convert that to an internship and then continue your involvement with that company. So I know a lot of companies offer it. There's some that don't. So in the consulting industry, for example, the bigger firms tend not to offer spring weeks at all, and they just do an internship and then a job. but a lot of companies do. So it's definitely something that you should explore and try to take advantage of if you can. It also looks great on your application when you're applying for an internship or a job in the future.
Okay, I think now that made it very clear. Let's talk about economics for a moment. I know this is also just for some reason economics is also, and maybe this is just my circle, but it's become sort of the thing. And so every other person I'm meeting who's not doing like a computer science or biology is like, I'm doing economics.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's very important before choosing that major to sort of not just be like going with the crowd, but being like well aware of like, this is what I actually enjoy about the subject. This is what I actually want to do with the subject after graduating. These are like my motivations for doing the subject versus like a lot of us just flow with the stream, like with the rest of the fishes. I've seen that go wrong like a few times in terms of seniors and elders I know of. So in your case, when you were in 11th, 12th, deciding what exactly you wanted to major in college, how did you finally land up doing economics?
Okay, so I think because I'm from India, there's always that thing of, are you going to become a doctor or an engineer? And when I was a kid, I thought I wanted to become a doctor, but then I did biology in ninth and 10th, and I was like, no, this is not for me. I cannot do this. It's too much, way too much theory because I really like math as well. So that was way too much theory for me. Then I thought about maybe doing physics, something in that, but I realized I don't like physics as much to be able to undertake such a strenuous course in it. It was in 11th, actually, no, it was in ninth and 10th that I took economics for the first time. And I really liked the subject. I really liked how innovative it was and the fact that people are coming up with theories every day or to explain different phenomena. I like how kind of human based it is, the fact that you're studying human behavior and how that kind of amplifies in a macroeconomic context. I really like the subjective aspect of it and also the analytical, very quantitative aspect of it. I've always kind of loved math through high school. So that's when I realized that economics is something I really enjoy because it lets me explore the world in a very real way and understand what's going on and maybe even make impact in some of the issues that I deeply care about. I've always been involved in volunteering work through high school, just concepts like poverty and how we can help that or solve that in some ways is something that drove me to take economics and tell my parents I wanted to do economics. It was initially difficult for them to understand why I wanted to do economics just because they haven't seen that, but they hadn't seen that in their lifetime up to that point. And to be honest, I was unsure as well about what you can do after you do an economics degree, what the exit opportunities are, and is it just research or can you enter a job as well? But I think I realized during the lockdown, as well as when I joined university, just how much you can do with a degree. And I'm sure you know that now. I didn't when I started, but you can enter virtually any industry with an economics degree. You might need a few supplementary skills, but an economics degree is an amazing way to start and really go into several different directions. And I like that. I like to keep my options open to know that I can always jump into something else rather than be siloed in the same industry or the same job for the rest of my life. So I think that's something that drove me to do economics. And I realized once I entered university that it was a really good choice.
It's sort of like a very good question to ask before choosing your major as to like, as you said, I think I love the word like exit opportunities. What can I potentially be doing with my career with this major? And I feel like I've got quite a few psychology students on the podcast. And so we always talk about like everyone thinks of psychology is equals like counseling or therapy. And then they told me like these 10 different things you can do with psychology, which is
Yeah.
important to be aware of. That's a question which I feel like not enough high schoolers ask before actually choosing that major. What if I were to summarize? I've got a few economic students on the podcast. I've had four major like high level career paths. So I'm going to sort of lay them out first, and then I'm going to ask if you have anything to add there or anything you disagree.
Yeah.
Number one is finance, wealth, investment banking. Number two is consulting. So getting into sort of big consulting companies, freelance, whatever, anything in the consulting space. Number three is government. public policy, work with the government, work with the Fed, any of that. And number four is academia slash research slash becoming a professor. Apart from these four, anything to add?
I think I completely agree. That's a very good list. And honestly, it does cover a lot of industries. So,
Hmm.
in its own, it's quite a collectively exhaustive list as well. I don't think there's anything else that I think could be added because those are quite broad. Yeah. But yeah, it's the fact that you can enter any of these industries depending on your passion. If you envision yourself in the public sector, you can do that. If you envision yourself in, say, the World Bank, one of those big organizations, then you can. This is a stepping stone. It's not all you need, but it is a stepping stone towards that. And really, if you want to someday change your career paths, maybe enter computer science, you can always take a few courses on that. But with your foundation in economics, I think anyone would be happy to have you.
And that is because you've got a good foundation in math. Is that the reason?
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact that so Bachelor of Science versus Bachelor of Arts in economic are vastly different. Bachelor of Science means it's a lot more math focused, and so I think half of my modules in first year that I was required to take were just math, and second year to a lot of math modules. So you have that good foundation, and then if you then maybe if you want to enter computer science, if you then take a few courses, a few languages, then you can
Mm-hmm.
distinguish yourself in a pool of candidates.
Hmm. Maybe one thing I would love to talk about in terms of exit opportunities or after economics, what you could do is I have a few people doing economics now who are very much into like social work, non-profits. They completely want to get into the public sector, work with non-profits, work on different challenging issues. You mentioned poverty and others. I also am not super clear, to be honest. Maybe this is through your interactions with your friends. How do you think like an economics degree lines up well for work in like non-profits, social issues, tackling global challenges? Like, how does that work out?
I think so. There's this thing called BRAC, which let me just find you the full form. So it's Bangladesh Rehabilitation Assistance Committee, but it's this really big international development organization that basically a lot of the research papers that I looked at and did in my third year development economics course, they would partner with this NGO to perform either experiments or do any sort of research in rural areas. So, and I even recently met one of the ladies who is kind of quite high up in the company. And so she has a degree in economics, and I think she's also doing a master's and now a PhD. So, with big organizations like these, you might often need to have just a bachelor's, will probably not be enough. You'll need a master's and then a PhD, maybe. But there's definitely scope because, like I said, it's more about the skills that your degree teaches you rather than the content itself. But having an economics degree and doing courses like development economics gives you a very good foundation as to just, the high level solving of these problems, or even introducing you to different ways that other researchers have explored these problems. So I think definitely it is a career path they can 100% pursue. It might need a bit of additional education, but I'm sure if they're passionate about that, they would be very happy to do it.
Hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I think I'm sort of seeing the connection now as well. And I think this is something even I've experienced through like the study of economics at university is on one side like awesome math, awesome quantitative skills. On the other side, like also an interesting way to approach problems like qualitatively through like interesting theories and models and sort of what is going on here. The whole space of developmental economics is like very interesting to me. I'm less like passionate about math than you are, to be very honest, but I'm very
Yeah.
much at the qualitative side and the theories and the models. Global developmental economics is sort of, or like behavioral economics. I think like those are fields for someone who's more like maybe qualitatively attuned in nature. Um,
Yeah. In my development economics course in third year, we had to, I think over the year, read about more than 100 research papers that different authors have produced. And Honestly, I enjoyed that course so much because you see such innovative ways in which researchers have decided to prove their hypothesis or tackle a problem and find solutions to it. And it genuinely will blow your mind how creative some people can get, how creative all of these researchers can get.
Hmm. I think the last thing I'll say on this before we move on is for someone who's sort of interested in solving like a big global problem like world hunger or poverty, there's a lot of like economics at play. And so I think it's interesting to go down rabbit holes of like people who have like looked at it from purely an economics or like a mathematical point of view, like this huge problem like world hunger, making it into like math and economics, and that brings about like interesting innovative solutions. So I haven't done too much of this myself, but I'm sure there's like rabbit holes that anyone can like go and dive deep on in terms of specific issues they're interested in, like an economic approach to that and solving that.
Yeah, I
Um,
can give you an example if you like. There's one research paper based in Zambia where they wanted to see the effect of incentives on how whether people decide to be community health assistants, which was their substitute for like a junior doctor, an assistant doctor who could do most of the things. And in that village, they would employ a lot of those people because it's harder for them to afford real doctors full time who would be staying there. And so the research basically looked at they basically had two different posters that they used in different areas. One poster emphasized the fact that, you know, if you become a community health assistant, you'd be doing so much good for your community, very altruistic kind of
mhm.
poster. And the other one is virtually the same, except they emphasize the career opportunities that they would get. This would be a stepping stone to doing bigger things and becoming, I don't know, really good at that industry. And then they noticed that people who were giving the career incentives, those villages' health outcomes significantly increased
Uh,
just because the health benefits were emphasized because that drew in people who are both passionate about the job and who are also very highly skilled at doing it. And so just that tiny intervention, just changing a few words made such a big difference for one village versus the other. And I just found that so mind blowing, just the fact that economics and learning economics can do that. So, really, yeah, like you said, it brings about a lot of innovative solutions.
wow. And there was sort of a hint of psychology in that as well, which is why I
Yeah,
think
yeah, exactly.
psychology is a really good combination if you
Very interesting.
behavioral economics side of
Yeah,
looking at things.
yeah.
We won't spend way too long on this question. I'm really like curious to pick your brain here because I had on the podcast I had a girl who went to Oxford and did PPE, and she was like very much pro like you can't study economics in isolation. You need to study it with philosophy and political science. They all work very well together, and so sort of when I first came to know that you were doing economics at LSE, the first thing that popped into my mind was like, why did she not choose to do PPE? And so maybe you can just hit a couple of points here if you want to talk through like your decision to just dive deep on economics and not do a proper PPE degree, which I'm assuming is like decently popular around the UK across different like colleges where they offer economics.
Yeah, yeah. I have a lot of friends who did PPE at LSE as well. I think there's two main points to cover here. First is like I said, the job opportunities. You get the exit opportunities from doing the degree that you do. I don't think that PPE offers any greater advantage than any other degree. It can show that you have a few other skills. The philosophy aspect can show that you're very good at, say, making your way through something logically and approaching that in that way. But and your economics degree could show that just as well. And especially in the kind of jobs that people doing our degrees enter, a consulting firm, they will not only just hire an economics graduate, they might hire an English major, they might hire someone doing medicine, because all they want to see is that you have the skills to do your job. And every degree shows certain skills. And even if you don't have the remainder of the skills, as long as you can show extracurriculars or co-curriculars that cover those skills and that show you have them, you're all good. The second aspect is interest. So I did take one politics module in my first year and two philosophy modules in my second year. And after taking politics, I realized I did not like that. It was not for me. So I'm actually glad I didn't do PPE because that would have meant a lot more politics. But it's just the fact that your degree is still very flexible, especially in the UK. Yes, you are required to take some courses every year. It's not as flexible as in the US where you can take any course from any discipline, but you can still take courses from other disciplines and other areas. So in my third year, I really wanted to try philosophy before I graduated. And so I took two philosophy courses and I really enjoyed it. And I do have that to show for myself that, yes, I took two philosophy courses, I did well in it. So I think just the fact that your degree is customizable, you don't have to follow a set path that maybe PPE offers or just pure economics offers, helped me or didn't make me regret not taking PPE. And the fact that your job opportunities aren't any less limited than if you do PPE. I was a lot more interested in just the economics, just the math, just the theory of all of it. So that worked for me, but someone else might enjoy PPE a lot more and find that to be the best option for them.
Okay, and so correct me if I'm wrong. If I were to summarize, in terms of career opportunities, you can sort of find your way around, get the extracurriculars in, and get those complementary skill set in. The number one things it boils down to is sort of passion and interest. Whether you really feel like you enjoy philosophy and politics as well, or whether you want to go like deep into economics, get deeper into the maths. Would you say that's a decent summary?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Okay. Want to come one level down? You've done UK, you've done economics. Let's talk specifically about LSE. I think it's interesting. I was always very clear, no matter what I'm studying, I want to go to a university which offers all the majors, just because I think it's important to interact cross domain. You sort of chose an institution specializing in sort of economics and related fields, philosophy, politics. I'm guessing they offer a few other related fields. Any specific pull factors for you to go to LSE versus a college which like offered all the different majors?
Yeah, sure. So I think because LSE specializes in the social sciences and economics this heavily, it also pulls in some of the greatest academics in the world. And that is something I really benefited from in my degree. I was learning from professors who had written some really radical papers in their time or are still producing amazing papers. And that is just a very you're kind of just really awestruck in that moment where I'm reading a paper and I'm having the actual author explain that to me. So just the fact that all of this exposure you get to people who are at the top of their field is really great for learning and really great for just making the most of your degree. I also think that LSE has a really great alumni network. Most of the LSE crowd is international. I think there's about 70% that's international, which that appealed to me because I like the fact that I can learn with people from different cultures and interact with so many different kinds of people, but also that offers an amazing alumni network once you graduate, because everyone will either stay in the country or go to their own countries or completely different countries. So you've really got this global network of people that you can always keep in touch with and always learn from or get any insight or advice from. So I really like that about LSE as well. And another thing that I really enjoyed is that because it's London based, most of the companies are based in London. London is kind of the financial hub in the UK. So networking opportunities that LSE offers are great. You'll often find companies just come to the university, set up a small stall, and you can just talk to them. You can, not just companies, NGOs, every different kind of place that you can work in. So the networking opportunities that studying in London itself offered was fantastic, and that's definitely something that I really enjoyed about LSE as well.
Yeah, I think those are some like very valid points. I want to go deeper on one specific point, and this is interesting to talk about, especially since you've graduated more than a year back, which is the alumni network. And I feel it's again something not enough people are taking into consideration before choosing the university. Whereas once you graduate, I've heard all sorts of crazy stories about how this random classmate who like they had one conversation with ended up giving them like this amazing opportunity, or they ended up becoming like co-founders of a startup. So like I think alumni network is something very, very valuable. And I'm sure as an alumni, you have like certain examples, or like you've actually lived through that. Any like specific examples that come to mind regarding where you've used the alumni network or it's come in handy in terms of career growth?
So I haven't used it that well as of now because I'm still quite early in my career. But when I was in university, I did reach out to a lot of people who had graduated from LSE and who were in jobs that I wanted. And we were just able to, because we had that common factor of us having attended LSE, we were just able to set up a call. We were much more enthusiastic to do it. And for me to just pick their brains about, how do you enter that job? What do you like about it? What do you not like? And so you have that great resource with you. And if you've been to the same university, you feel for someone who's younger than you. So you're more likely to help them. You're more likely to respond to their request on LinkedIn. And so that's one great thing. The other great thing is that LSE itself offers a lot of support from their side, from the career side. So I think for up to 5 years after you graduate, you can still avail all of their career not opportunities, but career helping opportunities. So you can do interview prep with some trained coaches. You can use their website to navigate and find opportunities that are available. So all of the tools that they have as well are something that you can use after you graduate. So the alumni support is great. You even get like a little alumni card after, so you can use their campus anytime, the library, and the library is fantastic. So it's a really great opportunity to also exploit after you've graduated.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like sometimes you think about using the alumni network. Maybe this is also a mistake I'm making, is sort of thinking about using the alumni network after graduating. Maybe, as you said, a great starting point is actually like when you're in college, talking to alumni who are like doing something which you want to do, and sort of, as you said, getting on a call, picking their brain. What do you like about your job? How did you land this job? So from what you're saying, I feel like first year, second year is also a great time to reach out to alumni who
Yeah.
have already graduated. That's also
And
good.
LSE's tools or your university's tools, and you can even use LinkedIn, because if you look up the company that you want, it'll show so and these many people from your institute or your university were hired here or will work here, and that just helps you really filter it out and talk to people who've been in the same position as you, been in the same courses, because the advice can differ by the course you've done as well.
Okay. What I want to do with the application process is not actually get into micro details or the weeds of the objective, sort of what is the application process or what were the components. I feel like that's something that someone listening can sort of research outside of listening to this episode. What I want to actually pick your brain about here is sort of higher level strategy approaching the UCAS application. I know this. I know. I mean, so a lot of this podcast might even be like a memory test because this was like way back for you. But from whatever you can remember, how did you like strategically approach the UCAS application? Anything you wish, like anything you think you did really well, or anything you think you did not so well, which you could have improved upon?
Yeah. So when I did my UCAS application, I wasn't as experienced about it. I didn't know what it would comprise and what I should approach it as. I did a lot of research then to find out, because the main thing there is really the personal statement and the reference letter that you get from a professor, teacher in school. So for the personal statement, I did a lot of research to find out what it is that they're looking for. And then when I got my offer and then went on to go to LSE, a lot of people did reach out to me and ask me that question themselves. How do I write my personal statement? I helped my brother with his personal statement as well. So I think what I've kind of realized, and because I've dished this advice out a lot of times, is actually quite recent in my memory. So I think the main thing is that in a personal statement, for the courses that you use, for the courses that you're choosing to do, the first step that I would recommend is to go to their website and look at the course, look at what the outline is, what the course structure is, and often they'll also kind of give you candidates doing this course should demonstrate the following skills, and they'll list down several skills. And that's really good because that tells you what that university is looking for in terms of your experiences through high school. And that helps you tailor which experiences you want to write about. A personal statement is very academic slash co-curricular focused rather than extracurricular. So you have to make sure that you pick the best experiences that you've had in university. And there's kind of three main important things you need to get across. First is your academic achievements and personal background. Second is your future career goals. They really want to know what you are going to do with this degree. And the third is how the university that you're applying to or the course that you're applying to will help you achieve that future. So obviously it has to be tailored. You have to, why this university? But the catch here is that you're just giving one personal statement for 5 universities slash courses. So you have to find a good balance between not making it too tailored to a specific industry versus not having it too general as well. So really just compiling everything you read on the university pages and then finding out what do I see in common here and using that as your building block for writing your personal statement. If you look at LSE itself, LSE cares about math a lot. That's one of their main requirements, even in terms of the grades you get in either IB or 11th and 12th and your 9th and 10th. So if you're someone who's looking to apply to LSE, make sure that you take a lot of math courses throughout your high school and do well in them as well. I did IGCSE in my 9th and 10th. So I took the normal math, extended math, as well as a higher level additional math, which I self-studied. And I think that kind of gave me an edge as well over applicants. So a math heavy application for LSE is a must.
I think for me in the US, we wrote like different essays for each university. So it genuinely is insane to me how you guys like tailor one personal statement, which is also not very, very long, to like 5 different colleges. And so if someone is doing like 2 different majors or 2 very different colleges, what I want to ask you specifically is like, how do you actually balance? Like you want to have a good essay for all the 5 colleges. At the same time, you want to like be speaking to each of them personally. Like how do you actually find that balance? How does that even work?
Yeah, so one thing I will preface before is that I know that recently the personal statement structure has changed. So instead of one personal statement, it's 3 questions that you have to answer, but they basically cover what you would be expected to write in a personal statement. So I think whatever I say should be relevant for that too. In my case, I was just applying for economics or economics and math. So it was fairly easy for me to have a general view as well as sort of tailor to universities. Universities appreciate that you can't specifically appeal to them and be like, I like that LSE has this particular feature and this is why I want to go here. So they appreciate that, and which is why they don't really care that much that you mention their name or tell them about why specifically that university. Instead, they want to see in general how that degree or how a university education can help you achieve whatever goals you have. So universities do acknowledge and appreciate that. In one of the cases, someone I was giving advice to was applying to design as well as engineering, both of which they share some similarities, but they're also vastly different. So in that case, you can kind of prioritize, think of what it is that out of those courses that you're choosing that you really care about most. And then, like I said, explore their website, see what skills they're looking for. Oftentimes the skills will be similar, if not the exact same. So make sure that you're addressing those skills, and say in his case, he was doing engineering. So we made sure that his application showed a lot of physics, a lot of math. But then because he was doing design as well, we included bits of art in it. And we also kind of showed how art and physics combined in some of the projects that he did. So it's kind of just making sure that you are almost sprinkling the bits of the niche degree you want to do, as well as keeping it general to what you really want to do most. And it is a balance that is difficult to find, which is why you might go through several iterations of your personal statement before you finally decide this is the one. And I would say when you're doing it, just get as much help you can as possible from family members to just read over your personal statement, see if it's conveying what you wanted to, as well as if you can reach out to someone who's done that degree. It's really helpful for them to, from their eyes, having known what works and what doesn't work, to give you some advice on how it's looking.
Hmm. You have to get, so for anyone listening, like guys, you've got to get very creative here.
Yeah.
Like find the balance. I think what's, as you were mentioning to me, the one advantage here is versus someone who's applying to the US, where we're writing like 3 essays per college or maybe more. It's like one essay for those 5 colleges only. So like spend weeks and make it like 100% perfect. You can like all your time is there. So I think that's like maybe one of the advantages there. In terms of reference letters, I think it generally is a very straightforward process. I think there's still like a little bit of strategy that comes in here in terms of you've just got one. So in sort of in terms of sort of who you're actually approaching and what do you want them to write? Do you want to spend 2 minutes just talking about how you approach the reference letter process?
Yeah, sure. So for me, it was fairly straightforward. I wanted to do economics, and all of the universities I applied to care about math a lot, especially LSE. So I didn't actually get my reference letter from economics. I got it from my math teacher, and she spoke about. I don't know what exactly she spoke about, but she just spoke about my general interest in the subject and how I've been doing well in it. And I think that is something LSE again really appreciated, because they really love math. They don't care if you haven't done economics in your high school, they want that you've done math. So I would say look at what your university cares about most. And oftentimes that'll just be the degree itself.
Mm-hmm.
But for in special cases like LSE caring about math, or say for design, you might not want to get a reference letter from design specifically. You might want to get it from math, because design involves a lot of math, and that's a very good foundation to have for design. So I would say, yeah, look at the crux of what the degree is, what it requires most, and show them that you have that in you already.
Makes sense. Lastly, before we actually, in a few minutes, do like a much deeper dive on your LSE experience specifically, there's a bunch of specific questions I have there. To wrap up this first section, we've been talking a lot about the application. You had like so many countries on your list. Like I think you listed like 5 or 6 countries. I'm sure it was like a great, also because you didn't take a gap year. So you were doing this while doing 12th. I'm sure it was crazy, like emotionally and mentally. And so I am giving you the opportunity to like now be speaking directly to a listener, someone who's in maybe 11th or 12th, currently working on the university application, emotionally, mentally, very crazy process, difficult to like stay motivated and just finish everything. Any final message from a more emotional angle to someone listening to the podcast who's currently working on their university applications?
I would say I know it's a very hard process. You might face rejections along the way, and those might feel soul crushing at the moment. You might feel like that's it, my life is over, but it's really not. You're just waiting at the brink of an entire new beginning. So I think just keep going along, use your family and your friends during this time, give each other a lot of support, because I know that having my family and my friends with me during that time was extremely helpful. In fact, when I was applying to the US, one of the colleges that I applied to, that I think I'd done ED on, rejected me. And so I remember that day I did not want to go to school, but then my mom was like, why don't you just go anyway? It'll be better than, staying in your room, holed up, thinking about it all the time. And I did go to school, and my friends were extremely supportive, and they kind of just made me forget about it. My teachers were also really, really nice about it. So I think that helped me move on from that. And then that's when I realized that I have something better in store for me that would be a lot more transformational for my university years. So I would say just keep going. Don't take any rejections to heart, because wherever you end up, it's about what you do there, not the reputation of the university, not the professors who teach you. At the end of the day, it all boils down to what you do there yourself. So you'll be okay, is my greatest advice.
Super. I love that. If I were to summarize like from 4 or 5 different episodes, very similar lines to what you said, is sort of, it's not the end of the world. if you don't get into, let's say, that tier one or the tier two of top universities, you end up getting into a tier three, tier four. That's okay. Maybe opportunities won't directly come and hit you, but you can sort of put yourself in a position that you get yourself in front of opportunities. Like that is probably the biggest difference between like the tier one and the tier four. Is like in tier one, opportunities might be like thrown at you, versus tier four, you've got to go and like step in the way of the opportunities. But I think it's still very much what you do during those 3 or 4 years versus like the exact name of the institution on the resume, which like ultimately. You think you'd agree?
Yeah, yeah. I'm a big believer of everything that happens for a reason. So if I got into that university that was actually not as reputed for economics as LSE is, if I got in, I would have had to go there, and then I would never have been able to attend LSE when that acceptance came along. So really, if it's happening, it's probably to either teach you something, to make you stronger, or to prepare you for something even better. Any of the three that it is a very good outcome for you to have.
Okay. Awesome. I think that was a really good section. We talked about first some of the decisions you made, plus we went deeper into the application. What I want to do now is fast forward in time a little bit, and we'll actually come to your LSE days. And there's a few things specifically I want people to know here, especially someone who's considering applying, someone who might get in, just to like give them a sneak peek into like life and those 3 years at LSE. The first question I'll ask, which is maybe not LSE specific, this is also maybe coming from a slightly selfish place. I'm struggling with this at the moment, but I hope this is also like something useful to anyone listening. As you mentioned, you did like 100 research papers for one class. I find it personally pretty difficult to go through a research paper, just something that is very jargon filled, dense, kind of dry and boring, to be very honest. It's not like a novel or a page turner in any sense. What's your approach when you're reading like a 20-page PDF, which is very difficult to like get through? How do you actually approach it strategically?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the answer to this is not going to be as satisfying as you might like, but really, it all boils down to practice. At that start of that year, when I knew I was going to have to undertake all of this, I had no idea. I was in the same position as you, not knowing how to approach it, not knowing how to get through so many papers in a timely manner as well, because some can be 20-page long, some can be 50, some even longer than that. So it is all about practice. One thing I will say though is that as you do more and more of those, especially if it's a certain kind of academic test, if it's a research paper where an experiment is done, then you kind of know what to look out for, what the really key things are in a paper. In a research paper, the key things would be the hypothesis they make, the methodology that they use to test the hypothesis, some of the key results, and any conclusions that they have, any discussion points about the validity of this or a larger scale. So you then kind of know how to approach each different kind of paper in a different way. I would say there's a few main tips that I could maybe give you and that might be helpful. First is that it's always helpful to understand the intention of the text. So if it's a research paper, it's likely to want to present a hypothesis and then convince you that it's true. So you have to look at the convincing bit. You have to look at how they did that. If it's a textbook, the aim is to likely just explain a concept to you. And that helps you identify what it is you want to look out for when you're reading that particular piece of text. Another thing is that I always recommend you skim read it first before doing a deeper read, because that just almost primes your brain to know what to look out for, to understand the crux of it. And then when you're doing a deeper read, you can be like, oh, I didn't quite understand that really well. Let me look into that a bit more. Or how did they prove this part? So let me look into that a little more. And I think the third thing is that it's always very helpful to do it with a friend, especially when you have so many papers or so many academic texts to cover. Even if it's the same concept, what I found, and before high school, I was completely like I was a solo learner. I would find it difficult to learn with other people, but that's something I learned to do during university. And I found it amazing because even for the same concept, the way a friend thinks about it, the way a course mate thinks about it, and the insights that they draw from it could be so different from what you did. So together, you're kind of just getting a really nice holistic understanding of the concept just by discussing and by clarifying questions that you didn't understand. So those I think would be my three main tips. It's all a practice game. It's always helpful to do it with people because people think in different ways. People approach problems in different ways. It's nice to see how someone else's brain works because that reinforces the concept in your brain in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be kind of my main recommendations there.
Yeah, I think you started out with maybe a less satisfying answer. I was like, oh my God, practice. But I think towards the end, it was satisfying in terms of you actually shared some like concrete tips, which I think
Yeah.
are good. I think the tips were simple, but I feel like I still am not able to like 100% implement those. And so I feel like even if they're just very simple, basic things, understand the intention, understand the motive, skim read first and then go deep. I feel like if you actually 100% apply them, it makes your life a lot easier.
Yeah,
Ultimately,
and that's where the practice bit comes in. The actual process of implementing those tips is what takes practice.
I think ultimately, after a certain point, it is meant to be sort of challenging. And the beauty of that is it even prepares you for career in terms of, I'm sure you're also like today reading dense texts and reading like long PDFs
Yeah,
and hard emails, but like you sort of get used to that also in terms of just building familiarity with discomfort in that sense.
yeah.
That also is valuable. Um, what I don't know how much I recommend this. This I do sometimes at Minerva, especially when we have to prepare for class. We don't have enough time and there's a lot of readings. Is what I will do is just straight split the text with a friend. And so I do half, they do half. It's not 100% ideal. It's always awesome to read all the text yourself. But I feel like if you find someone who's really able to explain you things super well,
Yeah.
and there's a time crunch, just split the text, do half half, explain each other, come to class,
Yeah.
and sort of that's the best for the moment. Also because
Yeah, and in that sense, it's important to find a partner who you know is smarter than you. I found someone who I thought was smarter than me, and that way I knew that whatever they were saying is going to be a good explanation. Whereas if because I personally have a problem trusting anyone else's preparation but my own. So this is a really good approach in that sense. And we didn't have ChatGPT during my university time, but now that you guys do, that's a great way to just put in a paper and ask it to summarize some of the key points for you before you even begin diving deeper into it.
yeah, I was about to mention, in fact, AI tools, very helpful. I still think it's valuable to go and read the paper, but like beforehand, it's so valuable to get the summary, get the key points,
Yeah,
just so you know like what to look out for when you're actually plowing through the paper.
yeah,
Of course, when there's time constraints, use ChatGPT, leave the paper, come
yeah,
after class. But ideally, read the paper, I guess.
yeah, yeah,
Um, what I want to segue into with you is actually classes at LSE. And so I'm sort of not even sure about the ABCs of how these work. I'm not sure even to an outside student how clear it is from like the official website as to how like the classes work in terms of structure. And so let's say you're taking like XYZ developmental economics course over one semester. What does each class actually look like? Like what is, if you could break that down for us in terms of micro details?
yeah, sure. So I'd say there's three main components. The first is that every course that you take will have lectures. These are usually either once a week or twice a week, no more than that. And lectures are taught by professors or lecturers who are basically tycoons in their field who have either specialized in that area and done a lot of research in it, or who have just done some amazing work in the field itself. So those are quite big actually. It'll just be the entire course basically, and one lecture just delivering the content. And at the end, there might be some time for questions which you can ask, but it's often this is more of a just receive everything that's being taught to you. Then the second thing that we have every week is classes, which are smaller groups, which are usually taught by PhD students who are just, again, really good at that field. They have no less knowledge than any other person. And this is for you to really, you might be given a problem set to solve before the class. You might be given a few questions to think about and then discuss in class. Or it could just be, if you're talking about a paper, to discuss that paper in class, to go over the key points and any questions. So this is a more intimate space for you to engage with the material that's taught a lot more and to understand and discuss with other people. Then a third thing, this is optional, is office hours with either the lecturers or the class teachers. This is, again, if you want to sign up for it, you can do, and it's often quite short as well. They'll probably just give you 15, 20 minutes. So you really have to drive the conversation here. You have to make sure that everything that you don't understand, you go there, address it, and maybe even discuss the paper in deeper length with them than they can in the classroom. I'd say the main few differences, firstly, that the class structure itself is very different to what it is in high school. Here, the decision to benefit from the course material lies entirely on you. In high school, I think teachers are very supportive. They'll make sure to go to each student and see if they've understood everything. That's not the case here at all. If you want to benefit from it, go ahead, do so. If you don't, then you'll see what happens at the end of the year, basically. So it's very imperative here to prepare for classes so that you can actually be engaged in the discussions. And the most interesting thing I found is that what they teach you, the course material as delivered in the lectures, will not necessarily directly help you in solving the problem sets. The problem sets are often very application based. So you have to firstly watch the lecture at least 2-3 times after to really understand the concept. Even then, just watching that will not help you solve it. You'll oftentimes, more often than not, you turn up to the class not having done the full problem set just because you couldn't, because it was that hard. But it's about how far you got with it, how far your thinking got with it, and then you have the teacher to then help you fill in the gaps and fill in whatever was remaining. So it's very individual based. You can make the most of it if you want to, but you can also very easily not do that. And I think in my second year, which is when I actually went to the UK, in my first year, I was back home in India because everything was online. In my second year, I don't think I used office hours that well, which is why I did struggle towards the end of the year in a lot of my courses. But then in my third year, because I'd learned from that, I knew then to go to office hours. And it's great. It's a great opportunity to get to know the lecturers and the teachers as well, because you can just sit with them and discuss the paper, discuss just questions, random questions that you had about the course or just about themselves as well. So it is definitely something that you should try to utilize as best as you can.
Before I ask you like a very brutally honest question, just one last note I'll make on office hours is that I feel like a misconception is you only go to office hours if you have like a question about the paper specifically, you haven't understood something in class. I genuinely feel like you could go to office hours for the simplest reason of just getting to know the person better. Like they have so much experience, they've done so much work. Like just go and chat about their life story, their journey to where they are today, pick their brain. This is a resource you have so much access to, especially during these 3 years of university. Like I feel like it's make the most of it. Like I would go to office hours of professors who even don't teach me to pick their brain about their life or what class they teach. But I feel like it's probably one of the most underrated resources at university in my mind is like office hours with professors. And I feel like only those few students go and those few students get a lot of value out of it. I wish more students actually went.
Exactly.
I wish I could make things a lot more. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And when my friends and I realized the value of them in our third year, we do this slightly selfish because it could disadvantage other students. But we would just, if it's the three of us, we just book 3 consecutive slots and we'd get almost an hour with the professor to just really go deep into something that we wanted to discuss with him. So we do that weeks in advance, just book every office hour in the week and just go there to them. And yeah, it's a great way to really get to know them and also just discuss so many different things.
Yeah, because 15 minutes is generally a very short period of time. I feel like always like you can always go ahead and make the ask. I want to talk to you for half an hour. Can I book 2 consecutive slots?
Yeah.
Then they might be open. Coming to the brutally honest question, if from what I'm getting, again, just a yes or no, your lectures are all recorded, so you can actually watch them afterwards.
Yes.
Okay. If you're just sitting in the lecture hall, looking down, looking at the professor, why even go to the lecture? Like, why not just wait? The recording comes, watch at your own pace. Is there a value of actually going and sitting in the lecture hall?
I think it kind of boils down to discipline. just in terms of if you tell yourself, okay, it's fine, I'm just gonna watch it when it comes out. You might watch it, you might not. When you're watching it, you'll probably be at home or in the library. You might get distracted while watching it. But I feel like waking up in the morning, turning up to your lecture, actually sitting there the entire hour, just kind of imbibes that discipline in you to keep working for yourself. In my first year, obviously, it was all online. Second year, also, it was online. Third year is when they started in-person lectures again. And I saw the enthusiasm because part of the college experience is just, going to a morning lecture, sitting in a big hall and watching the professor deliver. But at the same time, because people were so used to learning online, not many people would turn up there. And there'd be times when, for some of the smaller lectures, I'd be watching the recording after and I'd see one person in the classroom that the professor was teaching to, which kind of made me feel terrible. So I made it a point to attend as many as I could, because it's just, even if you're one of very few people there, then that just means you're more likely to get some interaction with the professor. Even if you're not, the fact that you're turning up there almost makes you, it's like you're turning up for yourself, basically, which is quite important in college, because that's what it's all about, making sure you're turning up for yourself, putting in the effort. And so I think it's great to watch the lecture and then get a brief understanding and then really understand it in the recordings. But I would say don't just watch the recordings, because that you won't realize it'd be a very subtle effect, but it can in some ways be detrimental.
Okay, so like maybe an answer which not everyone wanted to hear, but I love that was a brutally honest answer. I think I agree. Even if you're just going to be sitting there and not even interacting for whatever reason, I feel like just the fact that you woke up in the morning at 7 a.m. and showed up to the 9 a.m. lecture, one, the professor noticed you, like you made eye contact, they know that this person consistently shows up to lectures. Maybe that helps in the future in terms of some sort of opportunity or just a better connection. But also generally, I feel like a lecture hall will have, this is more a spiritual way of looking at it, but I think a lecture hall does have that vibe of sort of the learning energy or like the growth energy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lying in bed and like watching it on the laptop is pretty demotivating to me, at least personally. Like I need to show up physically.
Yeah. And it's also the fact that you're paying so much money to study at that university. If you're just gonna spend all of your time at home, then what's the point? What is all that money going towards? So it's just about, making sure you do the best for yourself.
Mm. Again, and maybe this is like a very small distinction, but I feel it's a very important one, is that at least myself in high school, a lot of people I know are used to like maybe a 45 minute high school lesson, out of which there's an intro, there's a conclusion. And so the actual like teaching time is like maybe 25 minutes. Versus at university, a lecture is like maybe 2 hours of information just being thrown at you, like with maybe less interaction and just consistently your job to sort of stay focused, stay engaged, and catch everything that's being thrown at you. And so, just as someone who has been through the 3 years of attending some like even 3 hour long econometric lectures, as you were just talking about, how do you actually, like, very simple, but how do you actually stay engaged and stay focused for those 2 or 3 hours? Any sort of tips and tricks there?
I will say that staying engaged varies vastly by professor. Some of them are a lot more engaging than others. And it's okay because the human attention span is limited, it's okay if you're not completely on it for each second or each minute of those 3 hours. The intention with which lectures are often uploaded online is exactly that, which is that we know you didn't understand everything from just sitting there for an hour or two, which is why we're giving you the opportunity to look over it again and understand it in a better way, spend some time with it yourself, just mulling it over. So the intention with which I go to lectures is not to understand the concept straight away. It's to almost get a gist of it, to get an intro, get a feel of what's going on. So it happens so often that the first 30 minutes, I'm completely engaged. I'm making notes, I'm on it. I've got the slide deck open in my own page where I'm just annotating. And then after that, I kind of just lose track of what's going on because I haven't been able to spend some time understanding a precursor to what's being taught now. So in that point, it's just nice to listen. Even just the fact that you're passively hearing the words, it does something. You do retain even 10% of it, which then helps you when you're rewatching it again. So it's completely fine, and there's no expectation there's nothing wrong with you if you are not alert for every minute of the lecture. It's just good to turn up there still, because you don't realize how much you actually gain from it until you're doing the rewatches.
Okay. Yeah. I think very valid. What we will do now is move outside the classroom, and so you spend some time talking about academics at LSE and how your classes work. I personally think college is a time to also be spending a lot of time outside the classroom. Like, do well in class, study. If grades are important, focus on that. But there's so much learning that happens outside the classroom, and a lot of that I think is just interactions with people from all over the world, and brilliant professors, brilliant peers, brilliant PhD students, all of that, which is like, you have to capitalize upon that also. It's sort of, you're paying for the education, but I think you're getting so much more out of it, which you sort of can't put the cost on, as to like making great friends and having those interactions. So I want to focus more on those interactions and the friendships to the lens of clubs and student societies. I think that's probably one of the best ways to actually like consistently be meeting new people and finding people with similar passions and interests. So walk us through your experience with like student societies and clubs at LSE, and what sort of value did they provide you?
Yeah, sure. So in universities, you'll find a range of clubs covering so many different things. You'll find a lot of career-oriented clubs. So in LSE, there were a lot of consulting clubs or finance clubs or even private equity clubs. And that just, it helps you either prepare for those interviews or meet people in that field that they invite over to speak about it and to just engage with you in a very real way. And on the other hand, there's also the fun clubs, just the clubs that are based on your interests outside of academic and outside of career. I was in the India Society, which was just a society, like a multicultural kind of society to promote that culture on the campus. There's also a lot of dance societies. There was an automotive society. I really like F1. So every week, whenever there was an F1 race, there'd be a screening of it on campus, and you could just sit with people who are also equally passionate about it and just, watch the race, talk about it, whatever you want to do. And so there's a range of societies on campus. This is career, there's academic as well. There's an economic society that I was part of, which would host academics and host speakers, as well as have like these research paper contexts where you could actually join a group and write your own research paper. So there's a range of things that you can engage yourself in, and it's really great because you meet so many different kinds of people there, and you learn so much from each of them, or they become, lifelong friends or friends for your entire university duration, especially as someone who had not who was not on the campus in my first year because it was all online. It was really helpful for me to join these clubs and meet people through that, in that way. So it's a great opportunity to meet new people. It's a great learning opportunity as well, because you'll often, LSE or any other university with their prestige and just that having that name that they have can attract a lot of speakers who are actually willing to speak rather than you just, reaching out or cold calling them. So it's a great opportunity to learn as well. And also another thing is that you'll often find yourself either on the subcommittee or the committee of any society or any club, which is a great opportunity for you to build your leadership skills, your teamwork skills, because I did encounter a lot of difficulties, and there were obviously a lot of arguments at points over certain things that we wanted to organize, but it teaches you that thing. And then when you're applying for jobs, this is where that extracurricular comes in, where, you can show that you've had leadership skills or you've had teamwork skills, even if you haven't had that directly through your course. So it's a great opportunity overall from having fun to networking to building your career prospects in the future. And I would 100% encourage joining as many as you can, because there's always something that'll be going on campus, and it's a great way to just be engaged, because university can at times feel alienating as well. So it's great to stay in touch with what's going on with everyone and with the university as a whole.
Yeah, I think two things I'd say here, and let me know both of these points how much you agree with me. One, I feel like what you do in the classroom and the academics is what is who looks great in the CV. That's what maybe gets you to the first round of application for the internship on the job or the job. But I think what really helps you ace the interview or the personality test is actually these clubs and these extracurriculars, everything you did outside the classroom, which is actually the final stage before you land the internship on the job. And
Yeah. Uh, Interviewers will ask you so many other things. Tell me about a time when you faced a problem in a team and how did you solve that? And you won't really get that from just studying or attending your lectures. That's something that you get from being part of a team in any way, being part of a sports team, being part of a society that you're in the subcommittee of or the committee of. And so it is amazing for that. And I have found myself drawing on those experiences heavily, especially as a university student who doesn't have actual work experience. If you haven't been working for a long time, these are the experiences that job recruiters expect you to draw on and to show that you have whatever that they're looking for.
And number two, which is more applicable to me personally, maybe you had a different approach in college, which I would love to hear about. My approach is sort of spend as little time in the classroom and studying as possible in order to understand what's going on and do well in class and get decent grades. I also have my cutoffs there in terms of after XYZ GPA, I'm happy. I don't care above that. And I want to be maximizing my time like outside the classroom in terms of building projects, exploring the city, making connections, networking, all of that. And so probably I think I did a decent job in my first year, which was like maybe I spent 60% of my time on academics, 40% non-academically. Second year, the biggest intention for me is to actually make a switch. And so I want to be spending 40% of my time on academics, 60% beyond. I think that might actually become more and more extreme in third and fourth year, especially because I'm clear about not wanting to do like master's, PhD after I graduate, but wanting to get into the world of work actually. There's a very different path for someone who wants to pursue like higher education. In terms of your split between like academics versus non-academics, how was that at SE and any regrets?
So first year, it was obviously hard because I was in India. So it was basically 90% academics, plus all of these societies tried to organize online events, which was a good way for you to meet people. But then at the same time, if you've never met them before, it's difficult to form and build a relationship entirely online. I still managed to do that, which is how I would not make a lot of friends, but make a few friends who then introduced me to more people when I actually came to London. So I would say first year was very much 90-10 because of the nature of classes and everything. Second year when I joined, this is me being brutally honest, this was my first taste of university, of independence. And so it was very, very, very outside of academics focused for my entire second year, which I realized later is not good because my academics suffered. And so in my third year, I kind of had to make up for that as well as maintain a good balance of those extracurricular activities. So it's difficult to get right. You'll just find your balance. You will stumble along the way. You will make mistakes. You might occasionally not do as well in a course as you would like to, but you can always make up for it. And I would say that I wouldn't give up the experiences that I've had in my second and third year beyond academics. I don't regret anything that I did because at the end of the day, I made those connections and I did well. Yes, the balance was a bit skewed. Third year was a lot of just studying, but I still got to do everything that I wanted to do. So no regrets from my side. And I will say it's very likely that you go in with a certain intention and then the year completely derails everything you had planned. So that's completely normal. That's just university for you, and there's nothing to worry about then.
Especially because you're currently working, like you got into the world of work after graduating. I'm not sure how the UK works also in terms of like the app, like what they look for in an application. I want to talk, like, spend 2 minutes on this big number of GPA. My approach is pretty simple, also different to many people. Is sort of, I have a cutoff, and sort of a four, maybe that's between 3.5, 3.6. I will try my best to get there. Like, I want to be there. I'm not happy with anything less. After that, I genuinely like will leave it to the side. Like, I don't care anymore. I'm not going to make the effort from a 3.6 to like a four, because the time I save in that space of that 0.4 points is all the time I'm going to invest into like my work and my projects and having fun and meeting interesting people. What was your approach? Do you feel like it's worth it to get the best GPA just for the sake of getting it? Or do you think it makes sense to have a cutoff like I've had and then just like leave it after that, invest into non-academic activities?
So I think that's one space where UK and the US differ quite a bit, in that we don't have a GPA system. We have first class, then upper second, upper third, lower third, and then fail. And so first class is usually 70 to 100, and then so on, like 10, 10, 10 increments until you get to the bottom. And first class is actually quite hard to get to because it's mainly exam based. I know in the US you're tested in a number of different ways over the year that combine together to form your GPA. Whereas here it's mostly exam based, or if you're in an essay based module, then the essays that you'll have to write. So you do kind of have to, you can't, in the sense that you said, you reach that certain GPA and then you leave it. You can't exactly do that, because to reach that certain amount that you want to reach, you have to prepare all year along for those exams and then write them in a good way. So in that sense, there's a sort of difference, and you have to kind of throughout the year have a good balance of both to make sure that you're not heavily focusing on academics and missing that out, or heavily focusing on extracurriculars and missing out academics, because it's kind of like you either get it or you don't. You can't, there's no kind of, layers in the middle. And also jobs here, I think they are, as of late, getting rid of the requirements that, you have to either get a first or a 2-1 to even qualify to apply for this job. I know a lot of big companies right now, PwC, EY, are getting rid of that requirement entirely. They care less about your academics and more about what you did. So that's changing, which is good. But at the same time, the larger amount of companies still care about the grades you get in the UK, at least. So a first class or a 2-1 is ideal, and it's not too hard as long as you're putting consistent effort throughout the year. I did not put too much effort in my second year, which is why my grades went really low. But then in my third year, I had to just put an overwhelming amount of effort to then make up for that and finally get the first. So if you put in the consistent effort, you can balance out the workload, because over here it's about, to qualify for a first, at least in LSE, it's about if you get a first in 10 out of 18 courses, or if your average over the years is a certain amount, then you get a first. So if you balance it out, if you say in my first year I'm going to get a first in these courses, and second year I'm going to try to get a first in these ones, and the third year that'll just leave me with having to get a first in these two, then you balance it out. You've got good time to maintain that holistic lifestyle as well. So because of the differences, it is slightly harder, but at the same time it's manageable if you're on it from the start.
I think we've covered a lot of ground over this conversation. We started with sort of macro decisions, applications, LSE, academics at LSE, clubs at LSE, GPA and its importance. We'll begin wrapping up. And so what I want to do is take you forward in time. You're already working in risk management 2 to 3 years from today. This could also be on a high level. What do you see yourself doing professionally?
So I really do like the consulting industry. It has several different aspects of it. There's risk consulting, there's strategy consulting, there's management consulting, etc. And the reason I like the industry is that when I was looking for a job myself, I was very clueless. I had no idea what I wanted to enter. And so what my approach was, thinking about things that mattered to me the most in a career. And those two things for me is that, I love solving problems. So if I could do that in any way, if in any way my brain is being forced to, think of different solutions or approaches, I like that. I like that stimulation. And the second thing is that I love helping people. So I do a lot of volunteering work on the side, but then if I can somehow in any, ambiguous way imbibe that in the job that I'm doing as well, I would love that. And that kind of really fit in well with me choosing to enter the consulting industry, because you're working with all of these clients. Some of them can be really big companies, and some of them can be really small companies that are just starting up and often have really good products and solutions that you would love to see more of, that are sustainable, for example. And sometimes they even work with NGOs, which is amazing.
Mm.
Um, so that is kind of why I chose the consulting industry, because for those reasons, as well as the fact that you're working with so many different industries. So it's almost like you're getting a crash course on each of them as you work with just one firm. And that I'm hoping will eventually translate to maybe me starting something of my own, which I would love to do. So for the foreseeable future, 2, 3 years down the line, I definitely see myself in the consulting industry. Would love to get as much experience as I can, learning from different people, learning from higher ups, learning from different industries. And I'm hoping that will eventually translate to either specializing in a particular industry, or with the knowledge that I've gained, identifying gaps in certain industries and starting something there.
Mm. Awesome. Now that we also have an idea where you're headed 2, 3 years down the line, you sort of kept it vague and specific at the same time, which I think is an interesting combination. So it's both high level and micro. What we'll do now is we'll jump into our fast fire round of questions. And so this is just a few quick questions, a few final things which we couldn't talk about at length on the podcast for listeners to know a bit about you and about LSE and living in the UK. So just a few quick questions, and from your end also the challenge is to be answering in as briefly as you can. Number one here is any economics field or any specific concept or theory that like blows your mind.
Mm-hmm. So I have mentioned this a few times throughout, that I really enjoyed my development economics course in third year, because unlike the natural sciences and economics, you can't just set up experiments and completely isolate certain factors. There's humans involved, so there's a degree of ethics and a degree of how much can you actually do. So economists come up with some ingenious ways to explore things that they want to. I think the easiest example I can give is that one paper wanted to look at whether autocratic governments kind of inflate their GDP, because obviously they're responsible for it. There's no common consensus system that makes sure that it is correct. So it wanted to explore whether autocratic governments inflate their GDP. And you can't, how would you explore that? Would you go to the leader, the military leader of the company and be like, what's your GDP? Tell me what is really your GDP. You can't do that. So the way they did it is they used satellite images to look at night lights. And the theory behind this is that night lights can be an indicator of economic activity. Just the fact of, factories being open, houses being open. And so they basically used nighttime lights as a proxy for economic activity. And then they found a correlation between economic activity and GDP. And so they had this relation going on. And then they looked at it for democracies versus autocracies. And then they found that for democracy, the relationship between nighttime light and economic activity, GDP, was almost directly proportional, whereas for autocracies, for even lower nighttime lights, the GDP was a lot higher than what would be the corresponding GDP. And they also looked at the components of the GDP, what it was in that is being inflated, and they found that it was mostly the public expenditure, which interestingly is something that a democracy or any leader would be responsible for, and also mainly the public expenditure, which was being inflated, which makes sense in theory because that's what they have direct control over. So I thought that was a really interesting and genius way to explore the concept and prove that yes, there is some inflation of GDP coming from those economies.
That's actually mind blowing. Like when I say mind blowing, some people talk about something that's fascinating, but like that is actually insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. Developmental economics has a lot of those interesting case studies. That's why I love it so much, honestly.
Yeah.
Anyone fiction book recommendation and a non-fiction book recommendation for a high schooler listening to this podcast who sort of loves reading generally?
Okay, I'd say in the fiction side, there's a book I'm currently reading called 100 Years of Solitude. I picked it up because the reviews were simply amazing. One of the reviews was, "This is by far the best book that's written since Genesis." And I was like, okay, what does this book have that's so great in it? And it's really so amazing. It's just the fact that it talks about, it basically follows this entire family over several generations and just really introduces you to the characters and the challenges that they faced and the life that they faced. And I feel like fiction in general is great for building empathy and for understanding that every character in a story has their own complex backgrounds, which, if you think about in your personal life, yes, you are the main character of your own life, but everyone also has their own reasons for doing certain things, which I think is great for just building that empathy you need to be able to interact with people and to be able to influence or just really gel with people. And that's another reason I recommend any type of book over just reading self-help books, because I feel like self-help books are more prescriptive, whereas this one gives you the raw ingredients and lets you extract what you want from it. But self-help books are still amazing. They're good to read once in a while and to then sit upon, reflect on, and really be able to implement those practices in your life. I'd say Atomic Habits has been quite amazing for me to read because when you're an adult, everything becomes very elementary. Even eating 3 meals a day becomes a habit that you have to rebuild because you're no longer kind of under your parents' protection or being fed by them constantly. So that's an amazing way to build new habits while, you're in your work life or your university life with all of the stresses and burdens that come from those.
Yeah, for sure. Love both the recommendations. Habits I have read. 100 Years of Solitude is sort of on the list. I will get to it eventually. Maybe I'll push it higher on the list now that you recommend it so much. Number 3 is one thing you love and one thing you dislike about living in the UK.
I'd say one thing I love is how multicultural the city is. When I was coming to the UK, I was quite worried. I was, will I find people like me? Will I be able to gel well with everyone? And then I realized that the Indian influence is so crazy in this country. Diwali is celebrated every year. Ramadan is celebrated every year. Chinese New Year. So many different festivals are celebrated with equal joy and equal importance from the government as well, which I really like in a city because you get to experience other cultures as well as maintain your own. So that's something I love about the UK. What I hate, I think, is that recently it's been in the news as well, if you have seen, is that there's been a lot of communal violence because there was an incident where I think 3 girls were, I'm not trying to be morbid, but they were murdered. And there was a misinformation that was done by a Muslim immigrant, but that was actually not true. But just because of that piece of misinformation, these riots started mainly in the north and somewhere in the south, but luckily not too much in London. So I think that's one thing I hate about the fact that these kind of violences still exist in the country. But I still think that relative to some other places in the world, the UK is still very safe to live in. So it's especially London. So nothing too bad. Don't worry. You will be fine if you come here as long as you keep your wits about you. Everything's going to be okay.
It still sounds like way better than San Francisco post-COVID. It's all
Yeah,
like
story.
Any new hobby or new passion you picked up during those 3 years at LSE?
So I've always really liked dancing, and one kind of new thing that I picked up in university was experiencing different dance forms. So Bhangra, for example, which is the Punjabi folk dance, and then Garba, which is the Gujarati dance, is something that I learned how to do and picked up on how to do, really enjoyed it. Did obviously a lot of, like hip hop, commercial, even a bit of contemporary. So definitely learning different dance forms has been an amazing highlight of my university because there was a Bhangra society and Garba Navratri is a really big thing over here. So just going to those 9 days or even how many other days you can make is something that I really enjoy and something that I surprisingly never did in India, but I'm glad I'm doing now.
Hmm. Super, and I think it's interesting. We people pick up all sorts of like niche hobbies at universities because of some random sport your campus offers or some random club. I think those are great memories to create like over the 3 or 4 years. So
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. Last of the fast fire, maybe a darker and a more twisted question. We normally talk about this in the main body of the episode, but because we didn't get a chance to, I want to talk about it now. I think every institution has its limitations or flaws or drawbacks. What is any one of those flaws of LSE which you perceived as a student?
So I think with LSE, although it's a great university, you will not get the traditional campus experience that many people look forward to in university. I know in the US and even a couple of universities in the UK, like Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, Warwick, they have a very like a defined campus that's secluded and it's got its own residential halls in it. LSE doesn't have that because it's based right in the heart of London. So it's difficult to build something like that with so little real estate space. Instead, they tend to have tie-ups with different accommodations, which will usually just house LSE students, but it's not really on campus, so you don't get that experience of dorm rooms and all of that. So that's something that I missed in college that I would have loved to also experience. So if that's something that you're really looking forward to, I would say think about it a bit before you apply to LSE.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, if you had to wrap up what's been like a great episode, very fun, also very informative, with one final message to listeners. The podcast is for high schoolers. So, ideally, for someone who's younger than you, about to embark on this journey of university and then get into life at large, any final words to leave listeners with?
I would say that university is an amazing time. You have so far probably been in the shelter of your parents and your family. And so this is your first opportunity to experience your freedom. And with that, you're going to have realizations about yourself that you did not have before because you were in a certain environment. So it is going to be an amazing time for growth, but at the same time, it's going to be challenging at points. There were a lot of times during my LSE journey when I doubted myself heavily. I was like, can I even do this? Can I get those grades? Can I, achieve this? And it can get very hard to, then pick yourself up and be like, yes, I can do it. But my greatest advice would just be to tell yourself that you'll be okay and that the fact that you've got to this point in university is such a big achievement. If you can do this, you can do anything. So really just be your biggest cheerleader. Never tell yourself anything negative. Never tell yourself I can't do this. Just if you flood yourself with positive thoughts, then your brain will also be wired to act in that way. So have faith in yourself. You'll be okay. University is hard, but it's also such an amazing time for learning and growth. And so I know you're really going to enjoy it. You will have challenges, but that's with anything you do. But just keep going, basically.
That's great for me to hear. I fly off in about a week. And so I think entering the second year, that's a very positive way to start. Really appreciate you sort of saying that. Very quickly, I won't say too much here. I'll squeeze in a book recommendation, which is The Secret. It's all about the law of attraction. I think based on what you said, this is like a must read, I think, for any young adult. And this is not specific to major or sort of what you want to do in life. I won't say too much. Go ahead and Google it if this is of interest.
Interesting. I'll note
Um,
that down.
awesome. Brilliant. If a listener really enjoyed the episode, wants to reach out, wants to connect, maybe someone has follow-up questions, what do you think is a good way to sort of reach you?
I think LinkedIn is an amazing way. I'm quite active there. So just if you look up my name, Rida Samreen, and I don't know how many profiles you'll get, but just look at the one that says I went to LSE. And yeah, you should be able to find me. This face is my profile picture, so there should hopefully be no problems. And yeah, you can message me there and we can always set up a call, talk about different things, anything that you like. So that's the best place.
Perfect. That was the episode. Rida, thank you for being on the podcast. Really loved the conversation and it was a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great experience, and I really hope that whatever we've discussed can be helpful to someone who's thinking of applying to the UK or to LSE.
All right, that was the episode. To all the young listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you feel more energized, inspired, and curious for the exciting university journey that lies ahead. Stay tuned. Many more wonderful episodes to be released on UNI Unveiled across a diversity of majors, countries, institutions, and speaker profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, UNI Unveiled. This podcast is just a small part of a much larger initiative undertaken by my family called Serene Strokes to spread positive sparks of growth, transformation, and joy among all our audience. Check out our official website www.serenestrokes.com. In the description and comments, please feel free to share other topics and questions which you would love to hear about from our different speakers on this podcast. Until then, take care and remember that this big word, university, may not be as scary or as intimidating as you think it is. Thank you for listening to UNI Unveiled.